Good evening and welcome to the very first edition of Behind the Headlines for 2025. And to our wonderful viewers, I want to wish you a very happy new year. Regan, a happy new year, and it's good to see you for 2025.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's great that you remembered to say 2025. I don't know about viewers, but I always find myself for the first couple of weeks having to recheck in my mind if I'm writing the date down or typing a letter. I invariably, for at least a week, begin by putting the previous year's date. So
I'm just ahead of the game. So
you are.
Let's reflect on some of the incredible events and stories that we've covered on Behind Headlines that have not only geostrategic importance, but also, more importantly, have prophetic significance that we've covered. I mean, 2024 has been one of those dramatic years. Where we've seen literally events happen that would normally happen in decades, happen within a year or happen in weeks. And when we kind of look back at all the very big topics and stories we covered, they've been absolutely extraordinary. I mean, 2024 was very much dominated by a general elections. So we had the US presidential election on Tuesday, the 5th of November, followed by previously the British general election, European general elections, and then also the French called for parliamentary elections after Macron lost the European parliamentary election. So it was a year dominated by general elections. But also, I think we've also seen this year the intensification of what Jesus described in the Olivert Discourse, the birth pangs, as we know that we are getting closer to his return. So I like to mention this, but we have had over the past 4 years massive geo-political earthquake stories that have geostrategic significance. So back in 2020, COVID-19, the global pandemic. 2021, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. 2022, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. 2023, we saw the mass terrorist attack by Hamas on October the 7th. And now in December 2024, we had the overthrow of President Assad's regime in Syria. Reflect on what 2024 has been like.
Wow, Simon, it's been an incredible year, and we ourselves have seen firsthand some of this play out. Even we began the year, it's hard to believe that time has gone, with a visit, a solidarity mission to Israel, and we went to those sites of those atrocities. And throughout this year, so much of Behind the Headlines has been dominated by discussing that ongoing conflict, that just conflict against Hamas and other terror factions in Israel and in the area of Gaza and the, Judea and Samaria, commonly called the West Bank. Also, we saw the, time fails to cover all of the big stories, but we've seen the complete implosion of not only Hamas, but Hezbollah. We've seen Iran emasculated, essentially revealed to be this power that has definitely a much stronger bark than bite in relation to its abysmal failure to have any impact in its threats and through its proxy armies. What an incredible, earth-shaking year. And you put it just right. The birth pangs intensifying. Someone I know recently was saying, is it just me, or does it feel like everything is speeding up? And I said, yeah, think of the birth pangs. It gets heavier and heavier before the coming of the child.
And if we see Israel's situation, so in December, going into kind of January of 2024, Israel was still heavily involved fighting in Gaza, and the US and the West were putting pressure on Israel not to go into Rafah, with the prospect of Israel possibly going to war against Hezbollah in the north. But what we've seen over the past year is that collapse of the Iranian circle of fire around Israel, the collapse of the Houthis against Israel, the Hamas against Israel, Hezbollah against Israel, and now the kind of domino effect now of the Iranians losing their top ally, Assad, with the fall of President Assad's regime, plus also the $50 billion that the Iranians have invested in propping up Assad's regime has come crashing down at the end of 2024. But unless you go to Israel, unless you see the kibbutzim that have been absolutely devastated by Hamas on October the 7th, you don't truly understand the horrors that took place in Israel. But thanks to the wonderful ministry of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK, both Regan and myself went to Israel at the end of January and February on a solidarity visit where we visited those sites devastated by Hamas on October the 7th. And this is our report.
There was a very chilling story that was told by the security chief, Rafi Babian, that we heard. And he recounted for our group his valiant efforts in seeking to lead some 30 vehicles, 42 vehicles initially, filled with civilians through open fields to safety on October the 7th. I'll never forget his words. He said there were 42 vehicles that he was trying to get to follow him, but quite a few were hesitant and wondering what they should do, whether they should follow or not. He said, "Look, I am the security chief for this region. Follow me if you want to save your lives." 30 did follow him. The next day, he retraced steps and went back, and the remaining 12 vehicles had all been gunned down, and the bodies of the civilians there were either in the cars or were strewn in the road around. And he said with a real degree of sadness how much he thinks about how he wishes he could have convinced those other 12 cars to follow him, but how a wise man has told him, no, but think about the 30 that you saved. And really incredible stories of heroism, tragedy, often sees these heroes rise to the surface, and Rafi Babian is definitely one of those heroes.
No, absolutely. And also from there we actually then visited kibbutz near Oz, but before we did, we're on the coach and we went past the site of the Nova Music Festival where 340 young Israelis not only were murdered in cold blood, but many of the women were raped and mutilated in the most vile, disgusting, evil manner by Hamas on the 7th of October. I mean, the one thing that also struck me about being in Israel, Reagan, particularly in the south, I've never seen Israel so green. They had so much rainfall, and so the site of the Nova Music Festival, when we went past the major where the stage was for the music festival, it was incredibly green. It had a chilling sense of peace to it, but I don't think anything prepared me for what we saw later, because our next stop was at the car park called Te Ku'am, which was a car park filled with 1,300 damaged and burnt out cars. And this is literally 1,300 cars that were shot up by Hamas on October the 7th are parked here. And this is just one of 3 major car parks. And in one of the shots you saw there was a huge billow of smoke. While we were there, we heard explosions go off in Gaza, and right where that smoke is in the background, that's Gaza. So we were so close to Gaza, and I literally picked up, which I'm going to show you now, kind of dark souvenir, but this was a sniper's bullet used by Hamas on October the 7th. I wanted to bring this back, particularly for those so-called Christians who don't believe that October the 7th happened, and it was literally like visiting the site of a Holocaust taking place or a pogrom taking place. And there we see there in this picture, this was the pickup truck used by Hamas, and those were the motorbikes used by Hamas on October the 7th. And what struck me, I think, when we entered that car park, and we were very privileged to actually have gone there, it was only open to ICJ because of their close connections with the Eshkol Regional Council and the Negev Council, and their close relationships in helping to provide bomb shelters and to-date parks, that we were actually able to visit this site. Usually this site is out of bounds for anyone, but to see the magnitude of what happened on October the 7th was horrific. And I think really that this does resonate around the world, because if you're a driver and you know what it's like to drive a car. So therefore, you can just imagine yourself being in one of those cars, driving on October the 7th, and literally being shot in cold blood by Hamas. And that's what we saw. But also the fact is as well, we see here, for example, these were the cars that were burnt out. And I was speaking to the security guide that we have, and he said that Hamas used this incredibly inflammable liquid. Normally cars would only burn for 2 or 3 hours, but this inflammable liquid meant that those cars burnt for anything between 12 and 13 hours with the people inside. And this is and they got this from the Iranians who smuggled in. And one thing I learned about this as well, we very much putting the blame for October the 7th on Hamas, and particularly Hamas's paymasters, the Iranian regime, and the Ayatollahs in Iran. But also the fact we have to acknowledge that so many of the weapons that were used on October the 7th came through the Rafah crossing from Egypt into Gaza. So therefore, the Egyptian government has a lot to answer for.
Well, of course, I think, Simon, it's fair to say that our year was defined in many ways by that trip and seeing so many of the horrors firsthand of what happened there, not just in the field, a car graveyard essentially, but in the kibbutzim as well, hearing firsthand from survivors and seeing as well the catastrophic rise of Jew hatred across the Western world in our educational institutions, on our streets, people who have seen images like we saw, people who may not have been there, but have a full recognition and understand what happened on the 7th of October in most cases, but simply they don't care.
Yeah, and without understanding October the 7th, you don't understand why Israel's in Gaza to destroy Hamas, or why Israel's in southern Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah, to prevent another genocide against the Jewish people like the Holocaust. The other, we are not showing any programs from January all the way to our summer break in August, because we covered that in our midsummer review. So if you want to look back at the midsummer review, which is on video demand or YouTube, you can, to have a look at some of the other stories that we covered from January to August. We're now going to cover from September to December 2024. And of course, the kind of biggest story was that Israel's war against Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is essentially a mini army, the most powerfully and the most powerful equipped armed terror organization in the world. They are effectively an army with the latest of kind of Iranian technology and weapons. They are considered a far more dangerous foe and enemy than Hamas in Gaza. And yet what we saw in September was nothing but Bond-esque. I mean, it could be a kind of Bond film where we saw the alleged Mossad operation to plant bombs in walkie-talkies and also pagers that exposed the entire Hezbollah network and took out so many Hezbollah terrorists, including Iran's ambassador to Syria and others, which made it possible for Israel then to launch a ground incursion into southern Lebanon and protect those communities in the north.
Well, theories abound, but the case is still shrouded in mystery. Hezbollah's communication system completely sabotaged, their walkie-talkies and paging systems blowing up simultaneously, but then over the next day there were other communication systems that were blowing up. They injured an estimation of over 4,000 suspected terrorists, all attached to Hezbollah. And the scenes from CCTV and other video footage around the country of Lebanon, and you see even in supermarkets, individuals, and especially formulated to impact and cause damage only to the individual who had the pager or the walkie-talkie on them. This was then followed up very swiftly by the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, taking out 150 missile launch sites in southern Lebanon. It then saw Ibrahim Akhil, the head of Hezbollah military operations, assassinated, many top commanders, and of course after months and months and months, you could argue years, of warning, Hassan Nasrallah himself was eliminated.
Which was absolutely incredible. I mean, to think that Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah terror chief, was in his bunker watching the Israeli Prime Minister's speech at the UN.
Yes.
And the last words he would have heard before he died was to hear the voice and the speech of Benjamin Netanyahu before that bomb was dropped on his bunker, which destroyed him and also the entire senior leadership of Hezbollah. So let's have a look now at one of the most incredible Israeli operatives in the history of the Mossad, and this is the attack on Hezbollah terrorists using pagers and walkie-talkies. Let's have a look. And last week, Israel struck hard against the Islamist terrorist organisation Hezbollah in Lebanon in what the Israeli Defence Minister Gallant described as the worst week in Hezbollah's history since its founding back in 1982.
And it's widely believed that Mossad has been behind this deadly pager and walkie-talkie attack against Hezbollah in their terror organization. It's one of the most successful, sophisticated operations carried out by any security network or force, let alone it has to be the most sophisticated carried out by Israel. This is something of epic proportions on a biblical scale. Right, it's massive.
So the big question is, and this is the question for the program, are we seeing the wrath of God being waged against Hezbollah? And I kind of believe we are, because the momentum of this war has changed. Israel was very much on the defensive. Israel facing a two-front war, essentially in the south against Hamas in Gaza, and then in the north with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah poses a much greater terror threat and military threat than Hamas. And Hezbollah is the jewel in the crown of the Iranian regime. So at all costs, they want to preserve their international terror organization that has a global reach, and to take out so many of its leaders, to take out so many Hezbollah terrorists, has really put this terror organization at a complete strategic disadvantage, and really has damaged their terrorism and military capabilities.
Well, this is also a massive psychological warfare move, because what seems to have happened is Hezbollah had been convinced somehow that they needed to change their communication systems. Mossad easily able to track mobile phone networks. Hezbollah is somehow convinced we need to get pagers. And this is where I think, Simon, that there's actually quite a few inside men involved at Hezbollah.
There have to be.
There has to be.
Without a doubt.
In this case, there's loads of double agents, I'm sure. Also, we have to remember that the Lebanese populace hates Hezbollah by and large, and it's been under its thumb and is facing economic devastation and ruin in so many ways. But what we see is they're convinced to buy pagers, and there's always a little bit of question as to the exact details of it, but best as can be surmised, a shell company is set up in Hungary, and this company has devices that they purchased from Asia, which
they're the intermediaries. They're the ones that sold them to Singapore, and then the Singapore company then sold them on to Hezbollah. But this was, I think, the latest news I've read as well, is that this company that was the factory where they produced these pagers was only established in 2022.
And its office, no one is in. No one is responding. There is one person who has denied the claim but cannot be contacted, and no one knows who she is. Mysterious woman. And so all of these different, very, very interesting links being made, and some of them leading down to dead ends. But very, very definitely, this is what seems to have occurred. The idea is that certain levels of explosive were placed in these pagers. There's question in regard to some of the walkie-talkies, because a little bit confusing is that some of these devices were purportedly 10 years old. So there's some question mark as to, okay, what about older devices? Is there something that Mossad has done with frequency? What's going on here? But that's part of the psychological game.
Absolutely.
And they've done this expertly.
I'm going to have to wait for a few years for the movie to come out. And there can be no doubt there probably will be a film coming out that shows how Israel destroyed Hezbollah back in 2024, which was unthinkable and unbelievable at the start of the year. And at the end of the year, we see that the Iranian regime is on its knees, and its wall of fire against Israel is collapsing, and collapsing fast.
Well, but meanwhile, we see that the UN has continually been funding one of Iran's proxy armies, its other proxy army, which is indeed Hamas. While Israel has been waging war also in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah, the fight against Gaza, Hamas and other terror factions has gone on to liberate the people of Gaza from that organization. And we reported on that incident back in October.
And this week's special guest is joining us all the way from Israel, and she is currently in her office in the Israeli Knesset, Israel's parliament. And our special guest for today is Shireen Haskell, representing the National Unity Party. Shireen, it's an absolute pleasure that you can join us on Behind Headlines today. And I had that pleasure back in 2019 of interviewing you in the Knesset. You did an amazing job. You do an amazing job in standing up for Israel and the Jewish people in the Knesset. But also you do a very important role, and that's reach out to Christian evangelicals around the world. So thank you for that. But share with us your thoughts on this new report that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, has given Hamas the sum of 1.3 billion US dollars in cash that the terror organization known as Hamas used to carry out the worst mass terrorist attack in Israel's history back on October the 7th, 2023.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you know, this is not a surprise for me. For the last 9 years, I've been trying to make a major change in what is called UNRWA, knowing that it was compromised, it was taken over by Hamas, a terrorist organization. And so we knew, and we weren't warned time after time, that what they're doing is they're actually paying the salaries of terrorists and of Hamas activists. Matter of fact, in 2006, we reported to the United Nations that the head of the Union of the Teachers of UNRWA in Gaza was in fact Hamas spokesperson. They knew it, it was out there, and for more than 10 years they refused to fire him. Only after about 10 years on corruption allegations, where usually this is a fight of power within this organization, that people actually are being fired. But they didn't care for the fact that he's a terrorist, that he's a declared terrorist, that he was a spokesperson of a terrorist organization. They still paid his salaries. When we see, and we have documents of the neighborhood commanders of Hamas, like in Khan Yunis, okay, thanking the head of the school education district in that neighborhood, thanking him for giving a week of paid leave from his position as a teacher in an UNRWA school for military training. And that was about 10 days before the 7th of October massacre. You understand that UNRWA is actually paying for paid leave for a week of military training before a terrorist attack where they butchered babies, raped little girls, and burnt our grandparents. So all of this is not a surprise at all. They turn a blind eye. On the one hand, they say we need to boycott, we need to sanction, we need to stop this terrorist organization. And on the other hand, they pay their salaries. So that hypocrisy is something that we've been dealing with for such a long time, and it's part of our tragedy and the difficulties on how we fight this terrorist organization. This terrorist organization is capable of recruiting murderous monsters from a population it was able to control and indoctrinate through UNRWA. They are controlling the major resources through UNRWA that are going into Gaza, because UNRWA is controlling housing, the water, the sewage system, the education system, the healthcare system, and so much more. So if they're in control of what is said to be like governmental services that are provided by the international community but are managed by Hamas, it is far easier for them to control, indoctrinate, and recruit, rows and rows of soldiers, of terrorists that are committed for the destruction, for the murder, brutal murder, and hatred of our people.
I extraordinarily think that the UN has actually paid Hamas 1.3 billion US dollars prior to October the 7th. Absolute moral outrage, and shows the true corruption and nature of the United Nations. But we covered a major story, has biblical significance, and this was the possible discovery of Noah's Ark, as the Sun newspaper reported under the headline, "Boat Breakthrough, how archaeologists hunting Noah's Ark made an incredible discovery, a boat-shaped mound dating back to biblical times." I enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
And this is what I think Behind the Headlines is about, whether it's the Ark of the Covenant, finding the Ark of the Covenant, very much like Indiana Jones, or the discovery of Noah's Ark. I love these stories because it really does show that there is a message that God wants to tell with the possible discovery of Noah's Ark. And I suppose what brought this and made headlines around the world regarding this one was the soil samples that were tested within the so-called Ark structure, that they had organisms that come from the sea.
Yeah.
Now, knowing that this is so high up in Mount Ararat, only a few miles from the Turkish-Iranian border, is exactly where the Bible said that the ark rested, and the fact that there was marine life found within the soil would indicate that this did travel the seas, and this could possibly be the final resting place of Noah's Ark, which would be one of the greatest biblical discoveries of all time.
Now, this particular site, Simon, has been muted on many an occasion as the site, but there's just more and more evidence that seems to be pointing to. And I'm reminded of the biblical significance for today, where we are reminded of it will be as in the days of Noah. We're reminded of how even in the days of Noah, people were questioning God's judgment, whether or not it would come. And so people today say, well, where's the promise of his coming? Why hasn't he come back? Why hasn't he come back? And the scriptures say people deliberately overlook this fact that the heavens and the earth were formed by and through water, and then were flooded by God according to that. But now we are stored up for fire. That's what the scripture says. Peter in his letters emphasizes the need to be ready and to live in holiness before the Lord. So fantastic story, captures the imagination. If it was at all possible to go and visit, to take a camera out there, would jump at that opportunity to have a mosey around what could very well be Noah's Ark. Here's more from that episode.
The thing is, some people will present the early chapters of Genesis as unbelievable based on the elements of long age and some of those records of spectacular happenings, this record particularly of the flood. But ultimately, all of that is rooted in a very strong degree of unbelief. If you look in Hebrews 11, you see it's by faith that we believe these things, and we recognize that Jesus, the apostles, the early church, they all without any question believed in the historical verifiability and veracity, the accuracy of the biblical account. So this is a relatively exceptional period of time where so-called professed Christians even, I can think even people in my theological institution that I trained in, who would have cast doubt on the accuracy of Genesis accounts concerning the flood. But here we have this group of archaeologists and scientists making a discovery that show humans lived in this exact mountainous region of Turkey between 3 and 5,500 BC, which the flood would have come at about 4,500 BC. We see that it's after a period of speculation, decades of speculation, and this theory, some might say, well, no, I knew that. I've heard of that before. Yes, but this is a further development in this so-called Durupinal formation, a boat-shaped mound. It's very obvious when you look at the imagery. It's very obvious when you see the scene. This is abnormal. You don't normally see this sort of imagery or terrain, I don't think. This would fit perfectly with a fossil, what you would expect of, like a boat-shaped fossil, for want of a better term. It's lying just 2 miles from the Turkey-Iran border, and now people are seeing this once again. Imagine the impact it could have if they find that this actually was Noah's Ark. A lot of people will be having to revisit their own interpretation of history, and will find that actually they're forced to concede the biblical timeline to some degree. We're now joined on Behind the Headlines with our special guest, Jeff Cuozzo, who's the pastor of Calvary Chapel in Bath. Jeff, welcome to the program.
If the evidence is valid, it would indeed be an extraordinary discovery, right? But here's the thing, faith in the biblical account doesn't just rest on archaeological proof. I mean, in Hebrews, we've been seeing in chapter 11, verse 7 for many years, by faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with a godly fear. And this story has been a matter of faith for us, right? For millennia even. And yet at the same time, while physical evidence might bolster, some people's belief, the essence of the Noah account really is that message of judgment and redemption that God has provided for us. I am so grateful.
If they have actually discovered Noah's Ark, which will be one of the biggest biblical discoveries of all time, what message do you believe God is sending to the world for this generation and this time in world history?
Yeah, a discovery like this, it could be a powerful reminder of the urgency of God's message to this whole world, especially in terms of judgment and salvation. Because just like God warned Noah about the flood, and he gave him time to build the ark, we see that God is not slack concerning his promises, as some consider slackness, but he's absolutely long-suffering towards us. He doesn't want anybody to perish. He wants us all to come to a place of repentance. So it really emphasizes that God's patient, but that his judgment is still sure. Absolutely. So the story of Noah's Ark, it really does. It serves as that warning for us to turn to God while there's still time, just as the ark was that refuge for Noah and his family.
And of course, one of the biggest stories that we covered in 2024 was the landslide victory by Donald Trump in the US presidential elections that no one really saw coming. So, I mean, this has got to be one of the greatest political comebacks in modern history, where in the aftermath of January the 6th, 2021, a disgraced Donald Trump had left office, was at an extremely low political place. And yet we saw 3 years later him emerge not only as the victor of the US presidential election, winning the electoral college vote, he won the popular vote, and both houses of Congress, and was named by Newsweek as Man of the Year for 2024. I mean, an incredible comeback from probably the most powerful political individual of the 21st century.
Well, without a shadow of a doubt, Simon, and many of us, and you yourself included, I think we were looking at the disillusionment over the past 4 years of the American populace with extreme leftist views from the Biden administration. We were seeing the disillusionment with the Democratic Party, and it's frankly very bizarre and we can say not just anti-Christian and anti-God ideologies, but anti-human, right? Just even on a basic anthropological, scientific level. It was adopting and embracing and going out of its way to embrace very damaging things. And eventually that we saw the tide turn. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump was a very significant cataclysmic moment.
Potentially 3 as well.
Yeah, exactly. The one that actually, though, hit his ear, we can see that you can see God's providence written all over that. And there's a lot of theory as to how this was possible. And, you know, it doesn't look good. A lot of people lost their job in the aftermath of that. How an individual was seen, how the shooter was seen up to an hour before. And no one apprehended him, how even a policeman realized he had a gun and looked to confront him but did absolutely nothing. He climbed up, and you see there's video footage of this. And he, retreats. This was something that, to some degree, inarguably, was allowed to happen. And Trump turns his head at the opportune moment, and it goes through his ear. Incredible act of God's providence in that, and massive impact.
And it's his response as well afterwards, which he said, fight,
Yes.
fight,
Yes.
face covered in blood, fist up in the air saying, fight, which I think then won him the US presidential election.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that the polls were indicating this was going to be a very, very close race, and everyone then, we also saw that the Democrats decided to drop Joe Biden as their presidential candidate and allow Kamala Harris, their vice president, to be their presidential candidate, and she got an absolutely horrendous defeat on her, where she focused the whole campaign on the issue of abortion, to federalize abortion. That was a whole campaign. That's all she focused about. That's all that she talked about. She didn't give Americans hope, who wanted to improve their standard of living. And of course, this was an incredible sea change for the United States. And the big question is, will a Trump presidency push back the globalists? So let's have a look at this very significant behind headlines as we marks the incredible victory of Donald Trump in the US presidential elections 2024. Firstly, I couldn't very much sleep. I don't think you can sleep very well when you know that you've got a US presidency election coming on. The American people had just been to the polls back on Tuesday, the 5th of November. And, as our mainstream media reported and all the polls indicating, this was going to be a very, very close, tight election. It was the opposite. It was a complete landslide for Trump. But it felt like I was waking up as I was looking at Sky News coverage in the early hours of the morning, that a ray of light had really shone through the darkness, that this darkness that has been over us and over the West over the last few years, it felt like it lifted, as if something spiritually was broken. My only thoughts then is that, the American people said enough of extreme liberal, woke, progressive ideas, enough of putting abortion at the forefront of the election campaigns, enough of these awful kind of extreme gender confusion, trans issues, that's all been put on the back burner. Common sense has come into play. Nationalism has again returned instead of globalism. So the kind of big question we have to ask, particularly as Donald Trump has got a huge mandate on behalf of the American people, will he be able to put the brakes on the move towards globalism? Will he be able to slow down the moves towards a central digital currency and a central digital bank, as well as the social credit system? Will he be able to stop this huge tide of mass immigration and open borders, which is designed by the globalists to destroy the nation state? I think he's given people in this country as well a great deal of hope, a lot of Christians hope across Europe and across the West, knowing that for 4 years we could have a strong American government that's showing true leadership in the world that we didn't see under Biden and Harris. And we could see the brakes towards world government really slowed down under his administration. He will be hated, but now they can never accuse the American people of Trump being a legitimate president because he won the popular vote and both houses of Congress.
Yeah, there is technically still a vote count underway in relation to the House, but he is all but set to take both houses, as we've said. What's so important in any case for Christians to remember in these elections and this scenario is it is God who gives us the authorities that we have. He is the one who gives us what we have, both for good, for mercy, and for judgment. And it's our responsibility to pray for and seek to lift up while speaking truth to the power that is. What should be reassuring, any concerns over Trump and his personal integrity aside, what is very reassuring is that we don't have a party that has built its whole platform on abortion. We have a party that is very clear on allowing legal migration versus rampant illegal immigration. It is being an asylum seeker is not a crime. It is not illegal if you go through a legal point of entry and declare asylum.
And this week's special guest is joining us all the way from Ohio in the United States. He's a Bible prophecy teacher. His name is John Haller, and he does a weekly program called Prophecy Update. John, it's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us on Behind the Headlines today.
It's great to be with you, Simon. Good to see you.
And John, do you want to just share with us your thoughts on probably the biggest political comeback in American history with the triumph of Donald Trump in last week's presidential election, in which not only did he win the presidency, but he also won the popular vote and took both houses of Congress, and now is the most powerful leader America's seen since President Reagan?
You know, it's a historic win. It's a win that rivals Reagan's win, I think, in terms of his victory in 1984 over Walter Mondale. But it is in the context of what's been going on for the last really 16 years in the United States since Obama was elected in 2008. It is historic. Nobody, as in 2016, nobody gave him a chance. Nobody gave him a chance in 2024. And for him to come back and win not only the popular vote, but the Republicans winning control of both houses of Congress has been an absolutely stunning thing. I mean, I voted in every election. I've been voting in presidential elections for over 50 years. And I've never really seen anything like this. It's pretty stunning.
Nothing short of cataclysmic. The election, how it transpired, how everything began to be unveiled, and to see the response as well of those who advocate for that leftist ideology, just complete catastrophe for them.
Such a shame, isn't it? It did feel like a ray of light, though, shining through. And this is our hope, really, in this Trump administration, that he can just push back on these awful globalist agendas and globalist policies that destroy our nation states, enslave us, impoverishes us, and takes our freedom away.
Well, the economy has already gone up. Yeah. The economy has already gone up. The markets reacted in an amazing way, because we have to remember, and this is aside from the moral issues with the Democratic Party platform. Bill Clinton said it's the economy, stupid. And people in the States have seen soaring cost of living. There's been intense taxation. We've now seen a place known as the land of the free become very unfree in relation to various factions of enterprise. We've seen in the development of even various ways of payment, a lot of suppression of that. The SEC always looking for ways it can raise taxes or hinder people. As soon as Trump won, stocks, markets began to soar. And that's an indicator of the positive outlook that people have. And we have to remember, Trump does know business. He knows economy. He knows it very well.
And of course, Biden also called the Republican supporters and the Trumpist supporters trash.
Yeah.
So that really then inspired them to come out and actually vote against the Democrats. And of course, we did the behind the headlines back in 2022 of Biden's dystopian speech,
yes,
saying that the biggest threat to America are from MAGA Americans, those who support Donald Trump. Well, people who support Donald Trump got Trump back in the White House. And so we will discuss his presidency in 2025 in the next episode of Behind Headlines. But for now, we also want to discuss probably the biggest geostrategic events to occur in the Middle East and throughout the world in 2024. And that was the swift overthrow of President Assad's regime in Syria. I mean, this was nothing less than extraordinary. Literally, the ring of fire that the Iranians have spent decades building up against Israel almost collapsed overnight. So within 2 weeks, we saw the collapse of President Assad's regime of Syria, and the Islamist Sunni rebels, or the Sunni Rebel Alliance, actually then take over, as we saw that Damascus fell without one single shot being fired.
Incredible scenes, and it will be interesting to see in this year, 2025, the ongoing fallout and what happens. Will it be built up? But here's our report on that.
Fell without a shot being fired. They wanted to preserve Damascus, and the Syrian Prime Minister was obviously then negotiating with the rebels, and part of those negotiations would have been the fact that they wanted safe passage for President Assad and his family to flee Syria. There was a fake news story coming out that the plane carrying President Assad had actually crashed and gone off the radar. I think this was to give the Assad family more time to make sure that they landed safely on Russian soil to prevent maybe a surface air missile to actually take out the aircraft as it was leaving Syrian airspace. That's the only conclusion I can come to. But I think the next few weeks and months will be telling in which direction the Syrian new government will take, and the very makeup of this new government as well. Will it be an ally of the West, or will it be a threat to the West? That's the big question.
Let's do the issue. We've seen just tectonic shifts in geopolitical structures this past year. We've seen Russia severely weakened. We've seen it weakened more and more, not just in relation to its conflict with Ukraine and some of the fallout after that kind of mini uprising among its troops last year. We've seen it hurt because its big ally Iran has been hurt. Remember, they all walk together. Our viewers need to remember, Russia walked hand in hand with Iran in these issues, and Iran has had massive egg on its face as a result of the total collapse of its proxy armies. This certainly would have emboldened the rebels, who for a few years have been laying low. And there's some interesting commentary that is out there at the moment, analyzing a lot of analytics on how HTS was able to accrue
significantly better weaponry in the past few years. It also, as a Sunni group, would be well funded, also from other nations, other big supporters out there would be able to supply weaponry.
And who would
technology.
those countries be? There's only two that come to mind, really.
Yeah.
That's the Turks.
Yes.
With President Erdogan in Turkey being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also the Qataris as well,
Correct.
wanting to see a kind of Sunni dominance and to create Syria as a Shia Islamist state, and that's the goal.
And what we're seeing as well through all of this has been with the increase of technology, they've organized themselves. The rebel groups previously were not organized. They didn't have officer classes. It was just a ragtag group of individuals. They introduced an officer class to the HTS rebel group and began to facilitate increased training, logistics, strategy. So they've been biding their time. And with the essential downfall of Iran's proxy groups, and with Iran being exposed as not as strong as it's made itself out to be, its bark significantly worse than its bite. With Russia otherwise occupied, Assad and his family were ripe for the taking. Damascus was ripe for the taking, and take it they did, with force and with speed, lightning fast, taking off guard. And what we'll see in the coming days is going to be the impact of this now allied group of rebels. How are they going to select leadership? Which factions are going to rise to the forefront? Some are more pro-Western, most are radically Islamist.
And this week's special guest joining us on Behind the Headlines all the way from Israel is Stefan Silva. Not only is he a Messianic leader in the Carmel region, but he's also an IDF officer and reservist.
Damascus is the capital of Syria. It's also one of the most longest term inhabited cities in the world. Could it be that the fall of President Assad leads to coming destruction of Damascus in line with Isaiah 17, I'll remind from verse 1 through 3, which speaks of the utter desolation of Damascus where it will be completely uninhabited. Is this at all relevant?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. It's something that we've all been talking about here in Israel recently, the destruction of Damascus, how it could be connected with the events that we're seeing take place over the past few days. You know, Assad's fall is definitely another significant block in the road that is being paved towards the complete fulfillment of Bible prophecy as it regards to Israel mainly in these end times, but also the surrounding nations where prophecy speaks about Egypt, it speaks about Syria, it speaks about the surrounding nations as well. And obviously that would include Isaiah 17. So I think definitely it's another significant block in the road towards that prophecy being fulfilled. How exactly it's going to come about, when exactly it's going to come about, we don't yet know how that is going to look and how it's going to occur. But definitely I would say it's another block that brings us a lot closer to that specific prophecy being fulfilled as well.
I also discussed in that episode as well the prophetic prophecies that refer to the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah chapter 17 verses 1 to 3, and with the Israelis taking out so much of the Assad's former regime's weapons and munitions to ensure that these rebel alliance don't get their hands on these weapons to threaten Israel, we could see potentially the destruction of Damascus happen in the coming years or decades. I think that we covered an awful lot of topics of that reflect on current affairs, but also those that have a truly prophetic significance. And of course, we did cover stories like the technology that we're seeing advancing at such an incredible rate, whether it's face recognition technology, AI technology, whether it's a single digital currency or digital bank. We know that this is the infrastructure that's being built for the Antichrist as well, that indicates that we are truly living in the last days. But I mean, what a year 2024 has been.
Cataclysmic. And what you said at the beginning of the program is very apt. The birth pains speeding up, just as that picture that Jesus gives. We see more wars, more rumors of wars. We're seeing kingdoms rising and falling. We're seeing those powers that are prophetically significant engaged in conflict, that we're now beginning to ask the question, could this be the beginning of this conflict? Could this lead to this? Could it? We're here on Behind the Headlines seeking to take the dots and join them up a little bit, and to watch and pray. We're not saying dogmatically this is what's going on here, but we are saying we need to be watchful, we need to be prayerful, we need to be excited. This program is not about stirring up fear, it's about stirring up awareness and expectation to go out and to share the good news of Jesus Christ with this lost and dying world, to shine a light on the ongoing relevance of Bible prophecy, and to urge God's people to pray and to join together as we
also this also gives intercessors and those who are serious about praying and interceding for our nations the knowledge and the intel in which to pray as we go deeper into these subjects. But I mean, 2025 looks like it's going to be another dramatic year. We have Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday the 20th of January, where he will be sworn in as America's 47th president, which will be a huge one. We've seen, could we possibly see with the Trump administration, war coming to an end between Russia and the Ukraine, and agreement being made there, primarily because Trump is not after regime change like the Democrats were in Moscow. And I think this could have a huge impact on US-Russian relations. And of course, we also have the prospect of Trump again. Could we see the collapse of the Iranian regime in 2025? Could we see a peace treaty between the Saudis and the Israelis and a normalization agreement for 2025? These are some of the big stories that we could see, but also no doubt we'll see a huge rise again in Jew hatred and a rise of Islamism in Britain and Europe as in 2025.
Yeah, and this is something to continue to pray about as we continue to recognize that in the latter days there will be an increase of lawlessness, and to be warned as followers of Christ that the scriptures do say the love of many will grow cold, and that relates to those who profess faith in the one true God. And we have to be stirred up in our heart and our mind to not let our love grow cold.
No, absolutely, but also we need to be vigilant.
Yep.
And we need to be watchmen and women on the walls of Jerusalem to continue to pray for Israel, and realizing that Israel is God's prophetic time clock. And how nations interact with Israel will determine whether those nations are be blessed or a curse. And it'll be interesting to see whether America becomes blessed again in 2025. Regan, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, presenting and producing Behind the Headlines with you. You're an absolute star, and I enjoy doing them very much, and you do a great job. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you to our viewers. Thank you for your support over the past few years now, but particularly in 2024. Let's approach 2025 with that joyful hope and expectation, though there's much that is frightening, though there is much that is fearful. We serve a mighty God who is working in time and space, showing that history is indeed his story. God bless you, and a happy new year.